Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back counting down our 100 favorite movies of all time. And today we are moving on to number 68, where we are going to be doing a horror special here. We're talking about Jaws and we're talking about Hereditary. Jaws, obviously iconic. Some people would call it horror. Some people would just call it a movie at this point. But Hereditary, I think, no doubt, a horror movie. This should be a little more interesting because we kind of get to look at the two different approaches, what people could work with, what they couldn't, a floating Toni Collette cutting her throat open, and a mechanical shark that refused to work. So we can look at kind of the means in the 70s compared to 2018, what works, what doesn't, and what holds up against the test of time. John, welcome back. And you're not going to have computer issues, you told me.
That's what I'm hoping so far. Things have been good today, so I hope it holds up. And I'm just excited. It might be September still, but we get to start spooky season a little early.
I know. It's actually crazy that we are only 2 weeks away from October. I'm pretty shocked, and that'll be good. We are starting off spooky season very early because next week we go into the Exorcist, so things just continue on for us here. And maybe in October, I don't know if we have any duplicates in October. That's actually something we should take a look at. But if we have any duplicates, maybe we switch out what we were going to watch for horror movies, if it's possible to end up throwing that in. But we kind of just do horror movies anyway. John did it on purpose.
Yeah,
so
I just kind of have a bunch of horror movies then anyways, so we're fine.
So we do The Exorcist next week, which let's say that's the 22nd, which it probably won't be because of the premiere of Survivor. The 29th, we have Edward Scissorhands, which, hey, he's weird looking. And then in October, John goes 10 Cloverfield Lane, Scream, and The Birds. So there you go.
We have a good... This happened to just line up perfectly for us, so we're just going to roll with it.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, anyway, we're starting off with Hereditary because, yes, Jaws is still more popular, John. Ari Aster, though, weird guy, very weird guy. I don't think there's any denying that. He also did Midsummer, which I did not like. And I feel like Ari Aster is a very, very polarizing director at this point. You either love one of his movies or you love the other. Like people can't even agree that like both his movies are good because they're very different. So people either like one or they like the other, and some people just don't like him at all, while other people absolutely love him. John, you have Hereditary on here. Let's hear why.
I spent a little time the last decade or so kind of veering away from horror based on just like circumstances I was living in. A lot of it came to living in the middle of the woods where, it takes 45 minutes for an ambulance to get to you. So, scaring your pants off is not the best way to live your life up there. But in that last decade, we kind of saw this change in the way horror movies were approached. We had kind of this birth of like this cerebral horror movie. We had finally gotten rid of the found footage horror movies at this point after they long stayed their welcome. We got into this point where, starting with movies like It Follows and The Babadook, where we kind of were using horror movies once again to be more representative of different aspects of the human psyche, looking at different things like grief and trauma and everything in that category, everything you can think of when it comes to mental illness. And Hereditary, to me, kind of marks the pinnacle of that so far. With the exception of one that I have way further up my list that's a little less horror-y, but doesn't really kind of hit on the same tone that Hereditary does. And
what movie are you talking about with that? The Witch?
The Witch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but what Hereditary did, even the people who love Hereditary will tell you, I don't want to watch this movie again. And I think that's such an accomplishment for such a movie that is polarizing, because there are people who hate it. There are people who love it.
Jordan Alford's in here
right here.
With a passion, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so well done. And even the people who really appreciate the cinematography and all the work that went into making this film, it's unsettling. It keeps you off kilter, and that's what I want in a horror movie.
Yeah, and so I've always said throughout this entire series, and now people are probably going to get tired of me of hearing it from me. But 33 episodes in, I've always said if a movie makes me feel, that's what I consider a great movie. I don't care if it makes me feel sad. I don't care if it makes me feel happy. I don't care if it makes me feel nostalgic. I don't care if it makes me feel unsettled. Whatever one of those feelings I feel, if I feel it strongly enough, that's what makes a great movie. That's why I have The Hunt. That's also why I have The World's End. Those two movies could not be any further from each other, but they make me feel. When Midsummer came out, it didn't make me feel anything when I was watching it. When the guy jumps off the cliff, sure, I was disgusted by that. But everything else, I didn't feel anything. I was like,
Mhm.
oh, okay, when are we going to get to it? Let's get to something here. Where's the spice? Like, there's nothing. And I have friends who totally disagree with me. I have friends
Yep.
who, if they, like when they make their top 100 list, they throw that in there, but they hate Hereditary. And the thing with Hereditary is I understand this is a despicable movie. I mean, it is
Mhm.
disgusting. The psychological look that this takes at a family torn apart, and with the mental illness and losing a child, losing a loved one, losing a parent, all of those aspects, it's brutal to watch. But at the same time, you feel that the entire way through this movie. There's never a point in this movie where you say to yourself, okay, good, I can take a deep breath. They literally don't ever let you. And so that's why for me, this is a great horror movie, because at the end of the day, a horror movie should make you feel something. And that's why I've caught like Rosemary's Baby, The Shining, The Exorcist.
Mhm.
None of those are easy movies to watch. Psycho, those are all incredibly difficult movies to watch, but you feel something. And that's what the most important thing is. Aster is trying to shock you in so many ways, but he's still doing it in such an incredibly artistic manner that it's hard to ignore it. While even in Midsummer, I felt nothing for most of that movie. You watch the way he's crafting that movie, and it's hard not to respect at least what he's doing, no matter which one of these you're watching. Unless you're Jordan, he can't stand it.
Yeah, and that is the thing, is like, because I remember I came back from Bella Coola, back into the branches of civilization again, and it was right as Midsummer had just been released. So a lot of people had been talking about Midsummer at that point, and like I hadn't gotten around to it yet. And I did watch Midsummer before I watched Hereditary, and it's a different type of horror movie because it's unsettling, because it's all day based. It's like The Wicker Man again, where
Yeah.
everything happens in the day, and that's a scary thing. What Hereditary does differently, Ari Aster plays so much with lighting in this film, and it's because we have these day scenes which are supposed to be these comforting scenes, which as you get further along in the film they get more and more unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have these night scenes where the really terrifying things happen, and you have these hidden figures standing in the background all the time, and things like that. It's his use of lighting in this film just helps keep you on edge the entire time.
And so it's funny you're talking about Bella Coola. So when you were talking about that before, this movie, I saw this at like the perfect time for me to see this movie. So I had just left Warner Brothers, and my friend and I, we decided we were going to do a cross country road trip. So we drove all the way up the West Coast and then drove all the way across. And by the time we hit Wyoming, we were on day 11 of this road trip, and we were going to be out for 3 weeks or something like that. And I said to him, I can't do this anymore. I need civilization. I can't just be driving around in the middle of nowhere. Like, I'm from New Jersey. I've lived in Miami. I've lived in LA. The one thing you see all the time is people when you live in those places. And so for me, we did those drives, all that happens. And when I had, this all makes sense. But when I had Lyme's disease, when I was in college and they didn't diagnose me, I had allergic reactions to penicillin. And the doctor told me that, like, I'm lucky I didn't go into anaphylactic shock. So anaphylaxis is something that really terrifies me, even though I've never had it or anything like that, but that's something that terrifies me. So that scene with the girl. So I literally watched this movie after driving across the country, couldn't stand being in the middle of nowhere, anything like that. I get home, my parents, or my dad at least, and my sister are huge horror people, and we kind of make my mom watch it. The first Friday night I'm home, this movie comes out and we go and see it. It was the most brutal timing for me because I was so on edge. My blood pressure had not come down yet. I'd come from a stressful job, this cross-country trip that wasn't as relaxing as I thought it was going to be, a lot of middle of the nowhere, just wanting to get home. And now I sit down and I watch this movie, and it hit me on so many levels. Whether it was the scene of them driving back where she loses her head, which is so unbelievably disturbing, whether it's just the Dowd scene where the thing is moving around. But the scene that got me and pretty much ruined my life for like 2 straight weeks is when he's laying in bed and she's hanging up in the corner.
Yeah.
And not moving. Because to me, there's nothing more terrifying. Jump scares don't do anything to me. Yeah, I'll jump, but that's the reaction you're supposed to have. That doesn't mean I'm scared. It just means I'm going to jump because a loud noise is going to make you jump. That's how it works. But when that scene happened and he's laying there and you start thinking about like, when I'm laying in bed, what if there's just something like, you don't know, because you don't have eyes on the back of it. That wrecked me for like 2 weeks. And that's why this movie resonates so strongly with me. And for me, like, one of the scariest movies I've ever seen in my life. Other people think it's hokey and doesn't work, but hey, that's horror. That's just how horror works. It's kind of like comedy. Nobody's going to laugh at the same stuff. Nobody's going to be scared of the same stuff. And that's just how it goes.
Yeah, and that scene is brilliant because Ari Aster, the patience Ari Aster has in this film is incredible. Because that scene, you sit there as an audience member who's probably consumed a bit of horror before seeing this movie. You see something like that, you're like, okay, she's going to jump down and like attack him in the bed. But it never comes. And it's just that anticipation of it coming. And then she just scuttles away. It's so terrifying. And then you get into the living room right afterwards, where again, she's in the corner and you're like, okay, it's happening now.
Yep.
And she comes from right beside him instead. Ari Aster plays so much with your expectations in this film and takes what you assume to happen. He's incredibly patient with it. And then he still does something completely different that you're not expecting.
Well, and I think that's why he's polarizing. And I think obviously you have the people like Jordan who just don't enjoy watching it because it's so disturbing and all that. But you also have the impatient people who, when they hear a horror movie, they're thinking of these horrible, horrible movies that came out in the mid 2000s, early 2000s that are, they're looking in the mirror and then they're going to close the medicine cabinet and we're all going to jump. It's like when that doesn't happen, that's what a lot of the audience is expecting. And maybe they're not cinephile type audiences. So they sit there and say, oh my God, this is boring. But I totally, totally disagree. And I think that it's patience. The first hour of this movie, really nothing scary happens unless you feel unsettled. The anaphylaxis scene, that is something you have to be unsettled by that. You have to know the stakes of that. You have to have been able to put yourself in that position before in order to really feel devastated by that moment. But really, this is a family drama for an hour where the mom is a little crazy because she just lost her mom and her daughter. Gabriel Byrne doesn't know what to do. And the son feels like he's being abused because he is. And so you have that happening for an hour of this movie before it actually starts to get into horror. I respect that because if you think about the movies I listed earlier, Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, Psycho, The Shining, they all take that exact same approach. And unfortunately, it's kind of a style that has died out over the years as audiences have become less and less patient and need the jump scares in order to want to go and see a horror movie.
Yeah. And the other thing that really helps with that is, once again, we have an unreliable narrator. And Aster sets that up really well with telling us that Annie has had problems sleepwalking in the past, and then has this scene, this incredible scene where she's talking about, like, I didn't want to be your mother. Yeah. And you're like, oh, she's woken up from the sleepwalking, but she's still dreaming.
And at that point, disturbing scenes ever.
So disturbing. And at that point, you're just wondering, is any of this really happening? Or is this all in her head? Exactly.
And so for me, like, that scene also kills me when they're screaming at each other and then all of a sudden she's soaking wet standing there and then he's soaking. It's like I get chills thinking about it because it's just, again, it's all unsettling. Like, I don't actually find this movie to be scary. I just find it to be so disturbing, but it makes you so uncomfortable that you can't stop thinking about it. And for some people, that's going to be a bad thing. You want to stop thinking about this movie as soon as it's over because it's ruining like it's not a fun thing to think about, but it's hard to get it out of your head. It really is. And so, like, yeah, there's that idea, like, oh, is it happening in her head or whatever's going on? But I think by the end of it, it's pretty clear that it's not happening in her head, that this is something that is, that is definitely happening, but it puts you in that world of what's she dreaming about? What is she putting this kid through? Did he kill her? And then it starts to unravel. And, what it does really well is it makes you think that Charlie is going to be the main character early on. And then when Charlie dies, now you think Toni Collette's going to be the main character. And it's really not. It's really, that's when Peter starts to take over a little bit. And the one thing I'll say is, like, even if you hate this movie, like despise this movie, Toni Collette's performance, Gabrielle Byrne and Alex Wolff are great. There's no denying it. But Toni Collette's performance in this movie is ridiculous. She is so good in this movie. Such a strong performance, because the one thing you can get behind is the grieving mother who just lost her own mother and then lost her daughter immediately after and has these mental issues in her family. Such an incredible performance. The dinner scene when she starts saying, "You just sit there and glare at me." It's brilliant. Like, I love her in this movie. I think she's so good. And Gabrielle Byrne is just a perfect, trying to keep it together kind of guy. Love him and everything he's in.
Yeah, and Toni, I don't know if this movie could happen if it wasn't for Toni Collette's performance. I think if anyone else was in that role, it's just not the same movie. And Toni Collette is a phenomenal actor and has been not really recognized for it a lot.
No,
unfortunately. But this has really kind of like opened people's eyes up to how strong of a performance she can give. And she is absolutely what anchors this movie. Every moment she is on your screen, you're feeling exactly what Annie's feeling in that scene. There's no way around it. You feel everything that Toni Collette is putting into this performance, and it just makes it that much better.
Yeah, it's crazy. She's only been nominated for one Oscar, and it was all the way back in 2000 for The Sixth Sense. I mean, that was the only one, and then really that movie came out in 99. So she never got recognized for any of her work after that. And we talked about The Hours earlier on. She's in she's phenomenal in Little Miss Sunshine. She's in The Way Back. I mean, she's got some great performances throughout her entire career, but I think this is probably the best one. But being in a horror movie, you almost get zero credit all the time. You never get the credit when you're in a horror movie. Nowadays, I mean, back in the day, you might get a little bit more credit, but even back with The Exorcist, Linda Blair lost to Tatum O'Neal because people just didn't like the character of Reagan because it's disturbing. It's not fun to watch.
Yeah, and this is kind of the time where we've now gone to a point where people are kind of starting to appreciate horror movies more now, and it's because of these films by people like Ari Aster, and like the Jordan Peele movies and Robert Eggers movies. These are the ones that are really starting to make people realize that horror as a genre does lend itself to phenomenal performances as well.
Yeah, and I think that, I really respect what we're doing. And there you go. Ask S.C. Davis and the Babadook about horror movie bias. Like, you're not kidding. I think like this trend we've seen because of people like Ari Aster, Ty West, oh God, what is his name? I can't even think of his name. But as you start to see this going on with It Follows, I can't think of his name who directed that. You had Here Comes the Night or Jordan, help me. It's the guy who directed Waves. I can't think of his name, but I know you love him. So throw his name in here. But you have these people who are starting to take their time a little bit more. The guy who directed The Witch, what's his last name?
Robert Eggers. Yeah.
Robert Eggers. Yeah. You have these people who are willing to make the slow burn horror and know that they're not going to make. So see, this is where it's funny with Hollywood. Hollywood is tricking audiences into going to see those movies because they know that cinephiles are going to love them. and they know that the reviews are going to be great. And then you trick in people who have no interest in that type of movie, who just want to go watch the 2006 remake of The Omen or whatever. And they want to watch that kind of movie because, that's the better version, obviously. And so they want to watch that kind of movie, but they're being tricked into seeing it. So they're still getting the box office while keeping the cinephiles who love this kind of slow burn horror happy, because it's a genre that kind of fell out. But like some of my favorite horror movies of all time, I would argue that I don't really have a single new school horror movie at all in my favorite horror movies. If I were to rank like the top 20, almost every single one of them is coming from that genre of horror. The Babadook, It Follows. It's Tyler Edward Schultz who directed Is It Into the Night? Here Comes the Night, something like that. I like that one.
Night?
It Comes at Night. Thank you. I'm mixing it up with the Ben Affleck disaster. Trey Edward Schultz. Thank you. But that movie, you have The Descent is a movie where it's a slow burn horror. That genre has really made a rebirth, and one that if you're into movies, I highly doubt you've seen it. But if you haven't seen The House of the Devil, but you're into slow burn horror, Ty West made that as if it was an 80s horror movie. It's got Greta Gerwig and the guy who plays every role in Anomalisa. It's that guy, and it's got all them, and it's such a slow burn. But by the last 10 minutes, it's the most disturbing 10 minutes I've ever seen in a horror movie. But I'll watch that every single year. I have a friend who went to the location where it was filmed to do a tour of the house, and he doesn't live in the same state as where the house was. But that's how that movie can impact you. And so I think it's really interesting how these movies build up their cult following, and ultimately they're probably the ones we'll still be talking about in 20 years because they build up that conversation, just like the movies in the 70s and 80s that were doing this weird shit like The Omen and The Exorcist and down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is kind of the wonders of the horror genre, and why I personally prefer it so much is because it does have, they're different. People experiment more with horror because of they're cheaper to make, and there's less expectation for them to perform well at the box office, so people are more willing to experiment with them. And as we go down my list, we're going to see examples of that in the experimentation, things like the Blair Witch Project, which created a genre of film that we saw for 10 years after that. And when we bringing things back to Hereditary, Ari Aster's ad campaign also led into this thing that you were saying earlier about the fact that you're kind of tricked into thinking Charlie's the main character of this horror movie. And you kind of think it's like an Omen-esque situation, and that's going to happen in this movie. And it's that subversion of expectation there that really helps set this apart. And especially when you realize every single thing that happens in this movie is orchestrated by this cult.
Yeah.
Everything.
And it's, we see that from the early time when they're all looking at Charlie and you're like, oh, this is weird. But again, because Charlie has to take over the male body because Payman wants it to be a male person. So it's how that works. And it's very interesting. And I'm looking at this now as I'm going down the IMDb, and I see it from, because we're talking about it, and I see Jordan here. I literally only go see a horror movie if it gets good reviews. I can't trust modern audiences. And that really is especially true with horror, because I'm looking at IMDb. Something like It Follows has a 6.8, The Babadook a 6.8, The Witch a 6.9, Hereditary a 7.3, Sinister a 6.8, Us a 6.8, The Descent a 7.2. All of these, and literally, you can throw everything on IMDb into a dumpster fire, and it won't even it won't even impact the air quality because it's so useless. But I'm just saying that it just shows when you're taking these aggregates, and obviously that's the point we've gotten to now. It doesn't matter. I'll laugh when somebody says, "Oh, it has a 95% Rotten Tomatoes." I'm like, that could be 95 garbage men who have never seen The Godfather, but you're going to sit there and you're going to trust those people just because they put their review on Rotten Tomatoes. But what I'm saying with this is it's totally showing how polarizing this type of movie is. But the audience it's going for absolutely loves it. Like the audience that this is going for absolutely loves it. And while there's always going to be a couple here and there where you're just going to be like, that's pretentious garbage or whatever. And that's what I thought about Midsummer. I thought it was just super pretentious and nonsensical. And I didn't care at all what happened to Florence Pugh. You always, then you get, you know, it's just kind of your preference. And which way would you rather go with it? Which way would you rather go with it? And for me, like, this is just a great genre that, you know, I'm happy to see we're still getting these kinds of movies made as we get into 2021 and stuff like that. And I'm one of those people, I'll sit down, I'll watch Saw. Like, I love Saw. Yeah. Like, you know, the torture porn type movie that is. Hostel, the first Hostel, like, that's a fun movie. Audition, Japanese movie. If you haven't seen it, totally messed up. One of the most messed up movies you'll ever see in your entire life. But yeah, that's you know, I'll sit down, I'll watch all that. And Gamer Girl says the disliker of this video has never seen a movie. No, the disliker of this video has disliked every single one of these videos in this thing, and I appreciate them coming by again and giving us the view. Duh. Thanks a lot, appreciate buddy. It. Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. But anyway, go ahead, John.
Yeah, and this movie has just all these little parts that really bring it together. It starts off, and you know right away that Astor's trying something different with this movie. Mm-hmm. We get that fantastic, like, we get the shot of the treehouse, and then it goes backs into the room, and you see like the model of the house, and it zooms in on the room, and you just get like this straight on angle of Peter's room. Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful the way he uses camera angle in this, and he focuses on things. There's a shot later on where it's again centered focused, and it's right after the mom's funeral, and there's the door at the end of the hall, and you're like, okay, they're obviously going to enter through that door because we're focusing on it, and they come in from the side. And again, this is Astor taking that expectation of yours and flipping it on its head, just like he likes that shot where he starts upside down and follows the thing until it's right side up.
Yeah. Yep. And I like the way he decides to do this all like as if it could be taking place in the model. You know what I mean? Like they are, and that's massive because they are all pawns in this greater scheme. But it's very interesting the way he shoots it. And I don't know if you noticed it while you were watching it, and I'm sure you probably did, but where the headline in a movie normally is, so like, you know, where they give you the headroom, kind of like how John and I are sitting. If I actually sit upright once, you get this much headroom. They have molding at that section of the entire house, but then the ceiling goes up another like foot or two. It creates this awkward, like, ooh, they're smaller than what this house, like they don't belong. Like everything is just a little off the entire time. Those little things, like again, in Midsummer has certain moments like this too. You just have to appreciate them. Like you really do, because it's just like, who's even thinking of that while they're worrying about it?
Yeah, and like that's the thing is like that's why these movies deserve to be investigated further, is because there is so much time and thought put into every little aspect of these horror movies, and it's something that we didn't get for a long time. We didn't get it in the 80s after like the slasher movies took over, and we didn't get it in the 2000s when the torture porn genre and found footage drama were everywhere. So it's so relieving to see this much thought going into a horror movie.
Yeah, because I mean, when horror movies are done right, there's just a way about them that just makes you feel good as you're watching it. You know, like there's just something about a good horror movie in the fall. Now I live in Miami and I just lived in LA, so maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but when the temperature starts to cool down, like there's just something about like a coziness to that. And you know, it's you want to be freaked out. Like you're willingly going into this. And Ari Aster knows you're willingly going into this. And he's saying, you know what? I'm going to make you more uncomfortable than you've ever been in anything else you've ever watched. But I'm also going to sit here and I'm going to make this family drama where you sit there and you're like, how would I react if this happened to me? And that's the weirdest part, is that you can relate.
Well, I mean, I can really relate because I lost a sister a couple of years ago. So seeing a family go through this, I've experienced this type of trauma, and I've felt this itself. And that's another reason why this movie speaks to me so much, because nothing seems too far in the way that Annie approaches any situation, because it is that desperation to get back what you've lost. I felt it. And Aster just portrays it so well in this film.
Yeah.
And then we have a cult that preys on it. And it's
that preys on it. That literally loves it.
And that's part of that unsettling aspect of this film, is that we see the suffering. We see the suffering these characters are going through, and like them trying to deal with it. And then we see these outside forces manipulating it and using it for this incredibly devilish scheme.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think where people start to lose this movie too is in those last 15 minutes. I love the last 15 minutes, but it is a little bit jarring from what the first hour and 45 of this movie is.
Yes.
It definitely is different. It's a different movie, but I'm all in on it by that point. I'm just like, great, let's get batshit and let's just do it. But I understand where people come from a little bit at that point, where they're saying to themselves, okay, like the cult thing and all that, but it is set up. And somebody who we didn't mention at all, and before we move on to the next, I got to mention Dowd, because Dowd is such a great actress. I love Dowd. And if you haven't seen her in The Leftovers, please watch The Leftovers. She is so good in The Leftovers. She is such, you will hate her with a burning passion for that entire first season. She is so obnoxious, but she is so good as an actress. And she plays this role perfectly. And I think because of me knowing her from The Leftovers before I watched this movie, it just hit me. It just hit me, because I was like, there's going to be something weird with her. Annie is, or whatever her name is, whatever her, Annie is Toni Collette, but whatever her name is in this, she's just not what she seems. And she is quite obnoxious.
Yes. And to get Dowd to play Jeannie, this like kind of like head cult person in this, after she plays a head cult person in The Leftovers, it just, it feels so right.
Yeah.
But she's absolutely phenomenal in this. And again, this kind of goes into what I was saying about how Aster sets up a lot of things in this film. The amount of foreshadowing Aster puts in this film is incredible. And we're talking little things that if you're not paying close enough attention, you don't notice them. Things like the person who passes Peter his weed is in the treehouse at the end of the film.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I didn't notice that. That's awesome.
So it's like these little things where I'm like, that's what I was saying about like everything's manipulated by this cult here, and everything to that point. You then assume, the assumption that you can make after that is that this is probably the same friend who told Peter about the party in the first place.
Yep.
And then of course Payaman with his light makes it so that Charlie goes outside, which then results in Annie telling Peter to take Charlie to this party. And it's this level of setup that Aster puts in this film that you almost have to watch it multiple times to get and to fully appreciate. Yet you never want to revisit it. And it's just so fascinating. And it's just a wonderful horror film.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. So if you haven't seen Hereditary, but you just heard all about this, go check it out. We recommend it in the way that Roger Ebert recommends a Serbian film. Go in knowing you're gonna probably hate every moment of it, but see if you can get through it. John, what was the best movie you watched this week? You can say Moonraker.
It was definitely not Moonraker. We'll talk about one of the worst James Bond movies of all time.
Maybe one of the worst movies of all time.
Yeah, it's really bad. But I actually got to, I think, yesterday, and it's like I saw a bunch of good movies this week, and I hadn't watched anything like that really stuck out. I think this is the first week in a long time where I didn't have a 4-star until yesterday when I decided to sit down and watch Duck Soup finally. And man, the Marx Brothers are hilarious.
Yeah, I think I said last week that like you can't sit down and watch Duck Soup and tell me you connect with that as much as like The World's End or something like that, because horror or because comedy changes and whatever. I love Duck Soup. The only thing I don't like about it is the like the talking to the camera stand-up bits. That's the only thing I
Yeah.
don't like, but the rest of it is great.
It's hilarious, and it's incredible to see how much it's stood up 90 years later. It stands up 90 years later.
Yeah, it does. It does. The Marx Brothers, a lot of what they do, they're visual gags. Is that the one with the mirror scene?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that scene is insane.
Yeah.
That scene is insane. That mirror scene, I couldn't remember if it was that or A Night at the Opera, but no, that scene is incredible. Yeah. Okay. I watched one movie this week. I watched one movie this week, and it was 15 minutes before we went live here. It was the only movie I watched other than Hereditary and Jaws, and it was Palm Springs. So that's my take. But I actually really enjoyed it. It's been on my list for a while. When it got nominated for the Globes, I was like, okay, I'll throw it on there. I kept putting it off because I thought it was just like a romantic comedy, and then I watched it. It was not what I expected at all. It was really entertaining, and I don't want to spoil anything for anyone. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out because I think it's a lot of fun. And Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti are fun. So that's all I got. I don't want to say anything more.
It's definitely a fun movie.
It's definitely fun. It's weird. It is a weird movie, but it was weird in a good way.
Yeah.
All right, let's go on to Jaws, a movie that I'm sure none of you have seen and that none of you have ever even heard of. I have such a love-hate relationship with Jaws for so many reasons. Jordan, I loved Free Guy. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, I have such a love-hate relationship with Jaws. And a lot of it comes down to I think everything in this movie is perfect. I love that the shark doesn't work, which is why ultimately this movie stands the test of time. I love that Robert Shaw was drunk on set the entire time. I love that him and Richard Dreyfuss really did hate each other and that they're not even acting in this movie. I love that poor Roy Schneider had to be, or Scheider, not Roy Schneider, Scheider, whatever, had to be in the middle of all that. Like, I love all of those things. This movie, like, broke movies. It really did. Yeah. This was the first massive blockbuster, and I would argue that while Jaws also created a genre that is incredibly epic, it also probably simultaneously began the descent towards ruining what would become modern blockbusters. Yeah. Because this movie was one of those movies where it's like, oh my God, we can make so much money off of this because people will just go and sit down. They'll talk about it. It's a summer movie. People are scared of it now. If you watch this, you didn't go in the ocean that entire summer. Made so much money, made a star out of Steven Spielberg, did all of these great things. And then it spawned Jaws 2, and it spawned Jaws 3, and it spawned Jaws 4, and it spawned Steven Spielberg being allowed to make Lincoln and be called great for it, and make War Horse and be called brilliant, and make The Post and be told that he's good. I feel like we're patting a toddler on the behind and saying, good job, buddy. Get back out there and fall again. It's one of those movies. It started so much, and it's so iconic, and had so many great moments, and it has such great acting, and it's such a chaotic movie. Yes. And it led to so many great things, but it also led to so much shit that has come out since it. Because it really is, I really believe that when you look at movies, you go back to all the way when like D.W. Griffiths, I know, bad word, sorry. When D.W. Griffiths made his movies, and I won't name them because obviously, Intolerance is great. Just don't go watch the other one. But, he makes these movies and that changes the game. Then you start getting talking movies and that changes the game. I would argue that out of all the movies in the 70s that came out, all the movies in the 60s with David Lean making Lawrence of Arabia, in the 50s making The Bridge on the River Kwai, all those movies, I really think that this is the biggest turning point in movie history. It is such a massive moment in filmmaking because now it was, oh man, how can we keep that going with this big action piece where we get the A-list actors, we put together this massive thing, and it changed the game. It really changed the game. And we've seen it devolve into bullshit a lot of the time because now it's, hey, let's get as many A-list actors as we can to sit around and do nonsense that we've seen a million times. But the technical direction on this movie is impeccable. He's filming on open water. Like, what is there's no CGI in this movie. That's all I got. So go ahead.
Yeah, and like that is it cannot be understated how influential Jaws was to modern cinema, because it was this first blockbuster, and it did start us on this trend that we see where we have blockbuster season every year. And no matter how bad some of those movies are now, it all comes back to Jaws and what Jaws did. And again, we said earlier in the podcast, you can argue whether Jaws is a horror movie or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think there's anyone who really watches this movie and thinks, oh, I probably shouldn't go in the water for a little while.
Back in the day, they were. Yeah, I mean, it's back in the day. I mean, this got people to not go swimming for like years. It's the same thing as Psycho with the shower scene where people didn't take a shower for days, and that wasn't good either. But yeah, and that's again, what is horror? Is horror the Hereditary thing where you're disgusted and there's blood and there's violence and all of that, or is horror watching a kid get eaten off a raft and all of that? It's 100% a horror movie, but it's one of those things where it doesn't fit the standard of horror that we have now set nowadays. This is an action movie at the end of the day, but it's terrifying. And there's some serious jump scares in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it has one of the most iconic jump scares of all time in this movie.
Yeah. Makes my fiance scream every single time.
And I'm going to be honest, this might be the first time I wasn't in water while watching Jaws. And I've seen this movie probably a dozen times.
Yeah. Wait, what?
At the town I grew up in, the outdoor pool would have a Jaws night every year.
Oh,
so
that's
they just
amazing.
throw Jaws on a screen while everyone's swimming in the pool.
Yeah, that's what they do that in the summer sometimes for 4th of July. I forget where I was when they were doing that, but it was that's what they would do. It would be like a Jaws pool party. I mean, but it's funny because, you feel, oh, that's fine, we're in the pool, but go watch that in the ocean now at night instead. Like, tell me how you feel then. And that's what's so great about it is, there's such different kinds of horror. Horror kind of gets like thrown in as, you have your religious horror, meaning like The Exorcist in every movie. And we'll talk about that next week too, where every bullshit movie that came off The Exorcist, because everybody had to just, all of a sudden now everybody's going to do exorcisms and we're going to be scary. And it's like, no, at this point it's just hokey. But so you have that and to watch, so you have that kind of horror. You have the jump scare horror. You have the Halloween, Friday the 13th type horror. And then you have this type of horror, which is, if you really like the type of horror that actually impacts your real life. Mm-hmm. Hereditary is not going to impact your real life in all likelihood. It really isn't. Like, you're going to be disturbed. Yeah. You might have a couple sleepless nights. You might have a nightmare here and there, but it's not going to impact your regular life. This is one of those movies that impacted people's actual lives because they wouldn't go in the ocean.
Yeah.
That's horror. You're scared. You might not be scared while you're watching the movie, but you're thinking about it after it's long over.
Absolutely. I mean, I was reading an article last week or the week before about how climate change is going to result in the warming of the oceans, and we're going to have great whites off the north or off the coast of the island I live on in Canada. And it's like, I'm just not going to go in the ocean then. Like, that's how impactful this movie is. Because it shows you, it just changes you and makes you think, do shark attacks happen all the time? No. But you know what? Still don't really want to be the target of one.
I don't want to be the target of one. That's what I always say. Like, yeah, it might not happen, but that doesn't mean I need to like sit there and root for it. Like, I don't need to test the fates. People do get eaten by sharks. I don't need to test that. But you have a much higher chance of just drowning. So,
Yeah. But I love the fact that we people always talk about the shark as the villain in this film. Mm-hmm. I actually think the shark shows up on the AFI top villains of all time.
Probably does.
Shark's not the villain. Shark's not the villain of this movie.
Well,
in my opinion.
The villain of this movie is the father from The Graduate, the mayor. He's the villain of this movie.
Absolutely.
Douche. He's awful, but he's great. He plays that role so perfectly.
So well. And the thing is, it's like, unless you're really thinking about this movie on another level other than like the surface level, because you have to go under the water to see the true horrors.
There you go.
But
John's so proud on that one.
I am. I really am. But in the end, like the real villainy here is the fact that they can't close the beach because no one will make money.
Well,
and like that's just what it comes down to.
It's also interesting to watch this in 2021 after we've gone through 18 months of COVID, where that was the thing at the beginning, and now that things are opening back up, people are talking. These discussions are happening on a much grander scale at this point. But 1975 wasn't all that different from 2021. I mean, it's the same stuff all the time. Money makes the world go round. They sing it in cabaret. Okay, so
Exactly.
like it's a thing. And in this movie, him constantly pushing for that. Of course, he's going to push for that. He's the mayor of a summer town. And if for anybody who hasn't actually lived in the Northeast, like in Boston, the Boston area, in Massachusetts, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, you get 3 months. That's all you get. You get 3 months to make like 80%. It's probably lower than that, but I'm just saying nonsense numbers before I get any like tax accountants in here. But to make like 80% of your state revenue. Like, it's crazy that the school year is based around Labor Day and Memorial Day in New Jersey. They won't go back till after Labor Day because all the teachers go and work as lifeguards and stuff. And they don't want to close the beaches. So, like, that's how this works. If you miss the 4th of July, you just missed probably the biggest day of your year by a lot. It's not even close. So when that's happening, that's why this movie works so well. You have an outsider who is in control, who wants to upend everything because it is the right thing to do. But we also know he's terrified of water. He's a city guy and he's brand new. And we have a mayor who's like, but I need to keep every business in this town afloat. I need to make everything work for these people. We can't be doing that. And he is still looking out for the best interest maybe of his people. You have these conflicting ideologies on this. And so what do they do? What can they do? You don't like it's so great. And that chaos of at the beginning, we get a shark attack. And after that, all he wants to do is figure out what's going on with the shark attack. And everybody's asking about BS in this small town. Oh, what do we, he's parking here. Oh, they're hitting the fence. Oh, they're doing this. And all he wants to do is figure out that chaos, that stress, that everything's being rushed, even though it shouldn't be being rushed. I mean, it creates such an atmosphere. I think it's why this movie still stands up so well, because those arguments that they're having about closing down the beaches, those are arguments that are happening in schools all over America about should you wear masks. It's the same thing, and it's almost 50 years later.
Yeah. And like that's the thing with this movie is it does stand the test of time because these are still age-old questions that we keep asking ourselves over and over again. And we even have the expert come in. Yeah, we have Richard Dreyfuss's character come in and he's like, this isn't the shark. And people are just like, no, we have to say it's the shark so that everyone like calms down because they create this sensationalism around the shark attack because a boy just got eaten in front of everyone at the beach. Yeah. And there's this massive reward. And again, like money's again motivating people. And we get all of these people coming out to try to catch a shark. And in the end, what that's doing is just perpetuating the danger of the situation.
Well, yeah, it's perpetuating the danger of the situation. And then everybody thinks, they catch that one shark. Oh, so great. Yes. Oh, awesome. Blah, blah, blah. They didn't catch the shark. These bozos are going to go catch the shark. Like, and that's what Richard Dreyfuss says. Like, they may have, but come on. Like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And like, I love that you just see Quint in the background, this whole beginning of the movie, just watching them, making fun of them, mocking them. They're jokes and they don't know what they're doing. And it's such great character development. I mean, you have the character development throughout the entire movie. And yet now it's going to make everything worse. And that shot when Chief Brody realizes that he does now have to go out into the ocean and kill this thing. And it goes under the bridge and now it's just the open ocean. It's so, it's perfect.
So good.
It's absolutely perfect.
Is. And speaking of, we talked about patience with Hereditary. Spielberg showed patience with this movie, and a lot of it came down to the fact that the shark didn't work properly. But we don't see the shark until what is it, an hour and 21 minutes into this film.
Mm-hmm. Because it broke.
Like, you don't actually get a shot of the shark other than like its dorsal fin and tail until an hour and 21 minutes into the film.
Mm-hmm. That's what makes it so impactful, though, because it's that something bad is happening, something's terrorizing these people, but that's what I always say, like, how do you ruin horror? You give them an origin story. Hannibal Lecter becomes a lot less scary when you find out. Pretty much origin stories ruin everything because it takes away the mystery. We talked about Solo and we talked about The Empire Strikes Back. It takes away the mystery of Han Solo. Mm-hmm. When you show it, it's a lot less frightening. Because unless it's something like The Exorcist, we'll talk about next week, and Reagan is absolutely horrifying in that movie. But that's because you're watching this happen to a little girl. But when you show the monster, and you keep after you show the monster the first time, it's not as scary. You figure it out after that. Mm-hmm. And that's why any David Lynch movie anybody's ever watched, they're so weird. He'll give you something absolutely terrifying and then never show you it again, but you're waiting for it to appear. Yeah. That's how you make great horror and great suspense. And with Jaws, it was, this girl gets eaten right away. You see the little boy get eaten. You see all these moments, but you don't actually see them. And finally, when that guy in the boat, the shark comes up and hits it and tips it. That's the first time you really see anything. And it totally, totally changed the game. And then by the time you see the shark and you get that line of, you're going to need a bigger boat, that's iconic because we had to wait that long to see this monster. And it feels so purposeful because at that point it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are other aspects of this film that I really enjoy. We've already talked about the acting and the fact that they have these 3 actors in this film. But the scene where they're comparing scars.
Top 5 scene in movie history.
It's
top 5 scene in movie history.
It's one of the greatest scenes ever. It's undeniable how fantastic that scene is. And it's coming right before the climax of the film, too. And it shows so much about these characters in this instance. And it just makes it so much more impactful with how the climax unfolds.
Yeah. Well, because up until this point, Quint's just been an alcoholic. He's an alcoholic fisherman, and that's it. And when we get the story about the USS Indianapolis, it's haunting. It just drops the whole thing because it's just coming off the song and everything. And him and Hooper hate each other up until this point. They hate each other. But as soon as he says, that was the USS, Hooper his face drops, and Brody doesn't understand what that means. But to see that change after they finally have started having fun together, and to give Quint that backstory right before Quint ultimately ends up getting eaten by a shark anyway. And that's why it's so impactful, because Quint has to get eaten by a shark anyway after he survived that whole instance. It's like the old man in the sea. It's, you're eventually going to end up coming back. And I love that scene so much. That is one of my all-time favorite scenes, that entire progression, the way that it just keeps going and going and going and going, all to get to that part, to go back to them singing, to then cut to something's not right here. It's perfect. It's so incredibly well done.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think about where this movie kind of came from, because the 70s, we weren't seeing these type of movies. The horror genre as a whole was kind of born at this time. Yeah, we have some of the outliers from beforehand, things like Psycho, obviously, and some of the other Hitchcock movies. But we didn't really have this type of horror movie with the dread monster hiding the entire time and having to overcome fear itself in order to conquer it.
Yeah, and it was just 2 years before that we had The Exorcist, but The Exorcist it's not so much about fear. They're ready to face this thing. It's just, how do you face the devil? But it's crazy that The Exorcist was the first movie, I think, to break 230 at the box office in terms of millions. And then Jaws 2 years later does it. So you're having these back-to-back massive horror movies that were breaking the box office records. Now, obviously, we've seen that over time with Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity and things like that. But these were the movies setting the records back then. And we just talked about how now we have these movies like that are going for the same thing as maybe what The Exorcist is going, slow burn horror, all that. Can't even come close to that. So it is interesting to kind of see the way that was building at this point, and people were kind of taking chances to make these movies to develop this genre that up until this point had been only somewhat developed.
It's just this iconic movie in cinema history for so many reasons, and it's so impressive that it just holds up still today, despite that. And like, this shark is some of the best special effects in any movie. There's not a moment where you think the shark isn't real when you're watching it.
That's what's insane. And it's 1975. And then you watch something like Deep Blue Sea, where Samuel Jackson gets eaten by a shark, and it's like, where'd that cartoon come from? Deep Blue Sea is the second best shark movie of all time. I'll say that. But it's iconic. That movie is hilarious. I love every second of that movie. I love that LL Cool J walks around with the parrot the entire time. But like, it is so funny to see how important it is and how important it still is. And filmmakers miss this and studios miss this, because studios are at the point where it's like, screw it. They'll eat it up anyway. I always think of Turtle Top from BoJack Horseman. If anybody's seen that, that is literally the studio executives. But when you sit down and you watch a movie like Lawrence of Arabia, Bridge on the River Kwai, and they have all extras, it's all real people. And you watch Jaws, and it's an actual made shark. Like, there's a point in this movie where, like, you can tell that the shark's eyes is just kind of drawn on to the same thing as the rest of the shark. But that mechanical shark holds up because somebody had to make the freaking mechanical shark. And if you're making a mechanical shark, you're not going to make a crappy looking mechanical shark unless it's purposeful, like James and the Giant Peach. Like, you're making a shark. In the 70s, we were making cars, so you can make a mechanical shark. And you make everything too clean and too nice and all of that when you start getting CGI and whatever else. And I think that is literally the reason that people will always fear Jaws, is because that shark is an actual creation. That is an actual thing that is in the water, not just a CGI blur every now and then.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of makes you yearn for that period where they weren't using CGI to enhance these films all the time. And that we were just using these practical effects instead. But don't worry, we can talk about practical effects much, much, much later in this podcast.
No, I know. We'll talk about that when we talk about The Thing and every other friggin' movie John has from the 80s, every Sam Raimi movie and all that. But we're going to talk about The Exorcist next week. It might be the best Dick Smith, the best makeup artist of all time. He did this. I think he did he do Planet of the Apes? Now I gotta look it up. I think he did this. I think he did the Planet of the Apes, whatever it was. But he's the best makeup artist literally ever. And to see what he does with Reagan in that movie, they've tried to make so many other of these movies. They can't do it. They can't do it. So now I have to look up to make sure that I'm not giving you guys fake news.
It was just a simpler time. And sometimes it would be nice if movies go back to it, because then we do kind of get these iconic moments where we are scared to go in the water.
Yeah. He didn't do the Exorcist. He did the Exorcist. He didn't do he did the Exorcist and the Godfather Part 2. So there you go. But, yeah, I just think, like, but the problem is you never go back to this. That's the thing. Like, we're never going to go back to this type. They've tried to do it 57 meters down and whatever other shark was open water, but people they don't have the patience for it. And you can make cheap movies, but once you start shooting on location in water and things like that, it's too expensive. And it's unfortunate because how do we get back to making classics? People always be, movies were better back then or whatever. If you stopped paying for it, they'd start making them like that again. I mean, that's the truth. They'd start paying. So that's what I got out of Jaws, man. Jaws, it breaks me because I love it, but I hate what Spielberg became. I hate everything he made pretty much after Saving Private Ryan, maybe with the exception of Bridge of Spies. I liked Bridge of Spies, but that was really it. But we have like Lincoln and The Post, and he just it was just like great. He slaps his name on it, and now it's great. It starts to cheapen some of his actual classics, and it's unfortunate. But the casting in this movie is perfect, and that helps too. So that's what I got on Jaws. Jaws number 68, and every time I watch it, I'm like, I can move up if it wants to.
Yeah, no, it's a phenomenal movie, and it had been a long time since I had seen it, but I definitely remembered how incredible it was when we were watching it this week.
Yep. There you go. Got anything else you want to say about Jaws?
Nope, that's it.
All right, so that was Jaws. So next week we are talking about The Exorcist, as I've said about 1,000 times, and we're talking about Sin City, which John is using as the replacement for Pulp Fiction because I have Pulp Fiction way, way higher up. So we're talking about Sin City, which kind of fits that. It's a knockoff Pulp Fiction. I'm not gonna lie, it's got that Pulp Fiction thing going on where it's all the storylines and how they interweave and everything like that. But very, very stylized, which is always entertaining. So that'll be a good one. Sin City from 2005, not the Dame to Kill For, right, John? You don't want to watch the Dame to Kill For?
No, let's watch the OG one.
Okay, I like to sometimes throw that out there just in case you change your mind. And then The Exorcist, and no, we're not going to watch The Exorcist 2, The Heretic. We're going to watch the first one because every other Exorcist is bad. So that's what we got coming at you next week. I don't know what day we're going to do it because the Survivor premiere is so damn long next week. We wanted to just kind of make this that we do after the Survivor episodes that Alexa and I record, but it may come out a different day next week just because it's a 2-hour premiere. But then after that, we'll be coming back. So that's what I got for that. John, anything else you want to say, or are we getting out of here?
No, we'll see you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.